Hello, and welcome to New People, New Ways, a podcast in partnership with Fresh Expressions Florida and Fresh Expressions United Methodist that explores new ways of being church through the stories and insights of scholars and practitioners alike. I'm Piper Ramsey Sumner, a layperson and cultivator of Fresh Expressions for the Florida Conference.
And I'm Michael Adam Beck. I'm the director of Fresh Expressions Florida and Fresh Expressions UM. And today we are joined by our friend Luke Edwards. And Luke is the Associate Director of Church Development for the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. He's a trainer for Fresh Expressions North America and Fresh Expressions United Methodist, and professionally trained ministry coach. He's the author of Becoming Church, a trail guide for starting Fresh Expressions, which I must say is an incredible book and becoming a widely used foundational text for the Fresh Expressions movement in North America and beyond. He co-leads a community of dads and father figures called Who Let the Dads Out, Luke at Lake Norman. And Luke is an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church and was the founding pastor of King Street Church, a network of Fresh Expressions in Boone, North Carolina. He grew up in an area of Western Massachusetts that was recently named the most post-Christian metropolitan area in the United States, where he joined his first microchurch at age 14. Between his upbringing and his work in local, regional, national levels of the Fresh Expressions movement, Luke has a unique perspective into the future of the church in a post-Christian society. He lives in Denver, North Carolina, where he enjoys hiking, coaching, and daughter's soccer team, and being a super fan of Charlotte FC, his local professional soccer club. And I'll also say that Luke has an incredible resource called The Listening Church that you can Google, and I'm sure he'll share more about that as we talk today. But so, Luke, we like to begin every interview with this question. Who is Luke Edwards?
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Piper. It's fun to be on the show. Been enjoying listening to all the episodes, so it's an honor to be on here. Who is Luke Edwards? I am a husband and a dad. Been married for, I think, 12 years.
Better get that right.
I know I should. And I have two daughters, almost 5-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I love being their dad. It's a lot of fun. I'm vastly outnumbered. And yeah, so I love being a part of a family. I'm a friend. I have just a high value of friendship in my life, and so I've got some close friends that I keep up with often, and think that that's just a super important part of life. And I like surprising friendships too, friendships with folks that you wouldn't think that you would have. That's something I put a high value on. I'm a learner. I love reading all kinds of random stuff. I'll go down weird rabbit trails, just learning and trying to stay connected to what's happening in the world around me, in ministry, in the church, and in the culture of United States and tech, all the kinds of different things. I just constantly learning, constantly reading. I'm a United Methodist minister. I didn't grow up United Methodist. I grew up non-denominational and heavily involved with Young Life. But when I came to college, got connected with the Wesley Foundation and really found a spiritual home in United Methodism. And so that's an important part of who I am now. And as a pastor in the Methodist Church, deeply committed to helping our denomination to adapt to the changing world that we find ourselves in. So that's a big part of me too. Is I'm an innovator, a person who's always looking ahead and trying to help the church to adapt to this changing world that we're in. So I want there to be a beautiful, thriving church for Mary Frances when she's my age. And so that's what I work for, and that's my why. And so, yeah, as the Associate Director of Church Development, I help the Western North Carolina Conference to adapt, to start fresh expressions. I'm, helping folks across the conference cultivate new fresh expressions, and that's my life. And then soccer is a big part of it these days. I think I was just eager for a new kind of distraction, and Charlotte got a new MLS Major League Soccer team, and I just dove headfirst into being a soccer supporter and all that culture, and it's been really fun.
That's awesome. I love that because you're like the team feel it is so new, and then I was like, oh, I think I heard that Charlotte has a new team, and then all of a sudden it was like everything, you had the shirts and you had all the season passes, and you were like taking all these selfies in the stadium, and I was like, didn't they just get here? How is Luke already like the biggest fan?
He's the early adopter.
Oh yeah. That was kind of attractive to me to like be a part of it before it even started. No one can claim I'm a fair weather fan,
That's true. I kind of feel that way with myself, like when there's like a new TV show or a new series or something, if I get too late getting into it, I feel like I can't really truly get into it. I want to be there right at the start,
Right.
Yeah.
That's the hipster in you, Piper.
Maybe it is, and you've got it too. Okay, I have a question, but first I want to say to our listeners and to you guys that it's raining really hard here in Tallahassee, so I'm sorry if you hear the rain behind me. I don't know if I'm tech savvy enough to fix that in post-production, but we'll see. But maybe it'll be soothing, except for the thunder. Oh,
there it was.
There it was.
There it is.
But so in your bio, Luke, you talk about how you joined your first micro church when you were 14. I want to kind of blend this in with this other question that's about how you got connected into the Fresh Expressions movement. Do you kind of see that micro church? Maybe tell us a little bit about what that experience was like, and if that kind of pushed you on your trajectory towards Fresh Expressions.
Yeah. So the micro church I talk about that I joined in 14 was actually Young Life, which at the time would have called itself a parachurch organization. But once I got connected with Fresh Expressions, I had a new kind of lens in which to view that childhood experience with Young Life, and it really was a micro church because for the vast majority of the people that were a part of that faith community, they weren't a part of another church. I grew up in a traditional church from birth on, was at church every Sunday morning, but for the majority of the folks that were a part of that Young Life group in Western Massachusetts, which super post-Christian place, that was their church, and that we didn't have that language for that because that parachurch kind of mindset was so ingrained. But I think Fresh Expressions has given me a different lens for that. Can you remind me the second part of that question?
I was asking if that kind of blended in with your journey of being connected with the Fresh Expressions movement now as a minister.
Yeah, definitely. So it totally formed me and gave me the mindset, gave me the ecclesiology, gave me the tools that I've used for Fresh Expressions. It was a foundation, I guess. And so when I was a missions pastor at Boone United Methodist Church in 2013 when my senior pastor asked me to start a campus of Boone UMC in the downtown area of Boone, which is called King Street. And so I ended up starting this kind of new form of church with folks that were not connected to church previously or hadn't been for a really long time. And what emerged, there's just like this new form of church. We're like, what the heck is this? Like, it feels like church, but doesn't look like other churches around. It definitely doesn't look like a Methodist church. And so after bouncing around between different models and different kind of what new forms of church, we encountered Fresh Expressions and was like, oh, this is what we're doing. And so once I found Fresh Expressions, I was like, oh, this is what I've been doing for a long time. This is and it was just a perfect language for who I was as a minister. Like a lot of the other models of new forms of church, like house churches and stuff, are like kind of anti-clergy, anti-denomination. And I was a clergy person of a mainline denomination. Like that wasn't helpful. And so to find Fresh Expressions that had this language of the mixed economy, blended ecology, and then had this way in which it fit new forms of church within a very traditional institution. It was just like a perfect fit.
I like that you viewed Young Life as a micro church, because I think you're right. Like, I think groups like that, I just met with the youth director for my district, and we were talking about doing Fresh Expressions and how easy that it seems like it could be, just, hey, we're going to meet at the ice cream place on Tuesday, bring a friend. And that's how it starts, and it can build. And this guy, he's a youth pastor, and he doesn't really even have a lot of familiarity with Fresh Expressions, but he was like, and I could see that community could become church for them. And I was like, you got it. You don't even know Fresh Expressions, and you know what that means. It just kind of first, like, I feel like it can come naturally when we just start to think about the people, it's a people first thing when you're thinking about those teenagers or the people that you're wanting to build community with. That's what I love about Fresh Expressions, is that it evolves kind of just naturally. And then there's people like you and me, and I know Michael had a similar experience where you're just doing some kind of church, some kind of cool ministry idea, and you learn about the Fresh Expressions movement, and you're like, oh, that describes what I'm already doing,
Right. Yeah, and there was a hesitancy in Young Life and in campus ministry. I was really involved with campus ministry to be clear, like, hey, this isn't church. Like, we still want you to be connected to a Sunday morning church. And I think part of that was just like recognizing that a youth couldn't be in Young Life forever and a college student couldn't be in campus ministry forever. So like, we need to prepare them for the real world church, which is going to be like Sunday morning and a little more boring and a little less communal. But now, like with Fresh Expressions emerging, like maybe we don't have to worry about that. Maybe that, like, if Young Life is your form of church while you're a youth, maybe when you go to college, you have that campus ministry. Maybe if you don't go to college, you find a Fresh Expression that you can connect with. That there's an easier bridge to cross than like going from this heavily like small, intimate, like fun, interactive thing to like 300 people on Sunday morning sitting in pews. Like, it's just such a dramatic jump,
Yeah, and it seems like that jump has been too much for people to make, because I think all the data statistics point to the fact that people who grow up in that kind of a church, really, where it has all the elements of church that we talk about in Fresh Expressions, those interlocking relationships with God, with each other, with the world, with the wider church. But then you go to this other thing, and it's not like that at all. And I think that's why we hemorrhage a lot of young people that could really bring their gifts, their voices, their passions to the church. And because they don't find that kind of community, they're like, yeah, no, I think I'll just do something else.
Yep.
Yeah. So I wonder if Fresh Expression is actually a way to create that kind of community for every age group of people, where they can have that kind of intimacy and community in a church.
Yeah, I think so.
So you wrote this amazing book, and tell us, like, it's super practical on how to, cultivate new Christian community, how to actually create these Fresh Expressions. What was your motivation? Like what brought you to that place?
Yeah. The when I first encountered Fresh Expressions, the blended ecology stood out to me, and then the Fresh Expressions journey. So like right out of the bat, those two things were super helpful, and particularly the Fresh Expressions journey. So for those that are listening that don't know what that is, it's like the 6 steps that most Fresh Expressions have gone through, and the church in the church in the UK identified that. So the early kind of Fresh Expressions folks identified as patterns. Looks like 6 circles typically is how it's illustrated. And it was just crazy helpful for me when I was starting Fresh Expressions at King Street Church. It gave me a kind of a map of where I was heading with these groups. It just kind of visualized a simple process, and it was just so helpful that I, like immediately started like wanting to learn more about each of those stages. And I've got my journal from way back when I was starting King Street Church, and I've started taking notes on each of those circles. Mentioned earlier that I'm a learner, so I've just got notes everywhere. They're on my computer now, but back in the day, they're in a big old journal. And so I started taking notes on each of those circles. Listening, like what does it look like to listen to the community, listen to God? What are things I'm reading that inform that? Loving people. What am I learning about that? Building community. All these things. Started taking notes, and then so I've read a ton of church planting books. I've read a ton of missions books. I've read a ton of theology, a ton of Fresh Expression books, and I would point people to all of them when folks would say, "Hey, I want to start Fresh Expressions. What should I read?" And I'd point people to them. But what I found with most of the Fresh Expression books at the time was there were like a chapter on the Fresh Expressions journey, or there was a book about how to start Fresh Expressions, but it didn't go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the Fresh Expressions journey. It'd be a little bit more nuanced, and I felt like it would be a really helpful resource for the folks that I had begun to work with. So I led King Street Church from 2013 to 2019. And from 2017 on, I was helping churches in the Western North Carolina Conference start Fresh Expressions. So I was kind of the point person for our conference and Fresh Expressions cultivating. And then in 2019, started that full time at the conference office. And that's where I'm at still today. So I started working with a lot of folks that were saying, "Hey, I want to do this. How do I do it? What should I read? How can you help me learn how to do this?" And I would tell them about the Fresh Expressions journey, send them the image of that, and talk with them through it. And I'd send them these books, and some of them were helpful, some of them weren't as helpful. But I just thought it'd be a really helpful thing to be able to send to someone a book that went through each of these stages with its own chapter, and just found that was a really clean way to learn about starting Fresh Expressions. And there wasn't a book that was like as clean through it. So that was what kind of inspired it. I shared that with Chris Backert, the national director of Fresh Expressions North America, and he's like, "I like it. Yeah." I mean, I think at that point, we had started 6 Fresh Expressions at King Street. I'd helped dozens of other Fresh Expressions in the conference start, and so I was collecting stories, collecting insights, learning from my own experiences, but also the people that I worked with. So I had all the pieces. I had those notes that I had started taking. I just kind of had to put them together. And then you mentioned practical, like since I had read a bunch of books, like I knew what I liked, and I knew what I didn't like, and I knew what I wanted to be able to hand to people in my conference. So that's how I kind of wrote it. I visualized a couple of the lay people in my conference who were passionate about starting a Fresh Expression, and I wrote it to them basically. And then one of the people I wrote it to was my wife, who up until my book had never finished a nonfiction book that I tried to get her to read. Like, she loves fiction. She'll read it in she'll read like a 300-page book in a week. But if I would give her like a Brene Brown book or like any kind of like nonfiction, I'm like, oh, you're going to like this one. Like, this totally relates to your life. She like couldn't finish it. Like, she just had this kind of block. Yeah. And so I was like, all right, how can I write this for someone like Jenna, who's just not used to reading nonfiction, like church resources? So I was like, I'm gonna make this kind of fun. I'm gonna put a nice extended metaphor in here. So I use the extended metaphor of through hiking the Appalachian Trail, and then try to make it light, funny, but also have a lot of practical suggestions for what to do, and then a lot of stories, and then some good theology mixed in too.
I think it's a great book, and I do love the imagery and the metaphor that you use for sure. I think a lot of people can get that, even if they haven't, like most people, hiked the Appalachian Trail.
Right.
It's still understandable for sure. And we'll put a link to it in the show notes so that people can check it out if they want to and read that for themselves. The real question is, did you put like dragons and princesses and knights in it for the novel readers?
That would have been a good idea.
Yeah,
maybe next time. Yeah.
Next time. So one of the things, like, I love how practical that you do a lot of your training, and I always wonder and think about, like, and want to hear from you and your experience. What are the things that usually get people stuck? Like, where do people get stuck maybe in that Fresh Expressions journey, or maybe even before that process even starts? What have you kind of seen, and what's the way that you have found that you can get people to get kind of jump over that hurdle?
Oh, there's lots. Sometimes I guess ahead of time people overcomplicate it. They think they have to start this huge ministry and have this huge plan, 5-year plan, and thousands of dollars of budget money raised, and all these kinds of things. And it's just, the Fresh Expressions journey is just really simple. It's like find a few people to go out, to build relationships, to build community, and then look for open doors for discipleship. So yeah, I think overcomplicating it. I think for my context, in the Western North Carolina Conference, like, we're just very, it's hard for us to think beyond attractional ministry. So a lot of the Fresh Expression ideas that will emerge will be real attractional at first, and you gotta, it takes some coaching to help someone move from attractional to incarnational. So like when we started a bunch of dinner churches before the pandemic, and most of them have shut down since then. A lot of them are starting back up now. A lot of the churches that started their dinner churches, it ended up being fairly attractional at first, and we really had to do some coaching around, hey, like, what else could you do besides putting a sign out front about your free community meal? Like, how can you form some community partnerships? How can you go out into the neighborhoods where folks are in your community and build those relationships so that you can then invite folks into community later? Like, I think that's a big challenge. One thing that mistakes that a lot of folks make too is just having too big of a team at first. So like, it ends up being a bunch of church folks meeting out in the community, as opposed to just a couple of church folks getting together with folks outside of the church. And then another one, I guess call this one the last one, but just having too much of your idea formed at the front. Um, and so it becomes another kind of program-driven initiative as opposed to people-driven, which the Fresh Expressions journey really tries to encourage. Like, no, like listen first, build relationships first, build community first, and then you'll kind of discover what that gathering looks like.
Mm-hmm.
We like having the gathering first. Something about us, we like having a kind of copy and paste program. It's just
Mm-hmm.
easier on us or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Luke, I like how in the part of the journey where we get to loving and serving, there's a lot of that comes off as like toxic charity, or your community sucks and you need to go make it better, or people have needs and so you got to. But you really reframe that to help us think about what are the assets of a community. What are the life-giving things of a community that you can go and, love people around that? What are the, practices that are actually binding people together and ever deepening relationships? And tell us some of the work that you've done on that, of like reframing. Loving and serving doesn't have to be, it gets caught in exactly what you named, that attractional kind of paradigm where it's, we got to go do stuff to our community in Jesus' name to make it better, rather than seeing a really beautiful community that Jesus is already involved in. Like, no matter where we go, there's Jesus. Hey, I'm Jesus. I was here, before y'all got here, but I'm glad you finally made it out here. And here's what's going on, right? So help us reframe that a little bit.
Yeah, so that was like a personal learning for me, where I started out at Boone UMC as a worship leader, and then pretty quickly I was studying social work, and one of my projects was to do something with a nonprofit. And so I was like, hey, can I do a community assessment with my church? And they were like, yeah, sure, that works. So we started doing some community assessment work, and I helped our church start a local missions program, and it was pretty much that kind of toxic charity at first. But my friend and I encountered Christian Community Development Association, CCDA, and just learned about toxic charity and about like empowerment models of ministry. And so we got really into that. And what I found that just approaching the community with solutions, I was like cutting us off from being in community together. And so with that experience, when we started King Street Church, I wanted to do something different, to instead of bringing a solution, like coming with the intention of building relationships and building community, and then finding solutions together. So with King Street Church, we started by building relationships and by studying scripture together and having spiritual conversations together, praying together. And pretty quickly, we connected with folks that were experiencing homelessness, that were incarcerated at the local county jail, that were getting out of incarceration. And when we approached that justice work together, so as a community, like with folks that were experiencing these social problems and these marginalizing, these oppressive systems, like we just designed totally different interventions, and they were so much more holistic. And it's just, so I went on a pretty dramatic journey from like savior complex, like, yes, I need to serve and solve all of my neighbors' problems, to saying like, whoa, this world is really complicated and these social problems are really complicated. And I'm really complicated. My neighbors are really complicated, and they are not problems to be fixed. They are like friends to be enjoyed. And like, as friends and as community, then we can seek liberation together. And I might have something to offer, I might not, but that gathering together in Christ and in Scripture, and with the hopes of all of us becoming free, like some really cool stuff happened. So yeah, when we talk about that second stage, like I changed the language in my book from loving and serving to loving people, because like service, so the language of service, the language of meeting needs, like I'm kind of done with them. Like I think we need to address justice issues, but we're putting a lot of Band-Aids on gaping wounds that won't be healed by Band-Aids. And we need to get at the root of these things. And I think being in community together is one way that happens. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's totally, thinking about I don't know, like relationality. That's all I see when I read the Gospels, when I hear about what Jesus was up to. It's all about existing with and alongside people, and, sharing meals and touching and walking alongside people and hearing their stories. That's what Jesus was constantly doing, And the incarnation, you mentioned the idea of being incarnational, like God didn't just come down and do some redemptive act and then go away. God came and lived and dwelled and became human, And I think that's what we can, as as Christians, as humans, we model that in our own ways that we can, and part of that is through just existing alongside people and investigating what it really means to be a neighbor. How does that look? The Good Samaritan story, go back to that all the time. It's like unlikely relationships with unlikely people, and connecting with them, and working and fighting for each other. And I think, I don't know, there's so many good things about that. And that's to me is what the Christian life is all about. The other stuff's kind of fluff, but like for me, it's about our relationships and embodying what Jesus did,
Right. Yeah. And I just found like service, you can actually keep people at a distance by serving them, like it's way easier to serve people food from a buffet line at a soup kitchen than it is to like be in relationship together.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love the language that we're trying to, put out into the world through Fresh Expressions and have a distinct Wesleyan kind of perspective on all this of adventuring. So we're Advent people, right? We're on an adventure of Jesus coming in the past, coming in us today, and coming again soon to kind of consummate and heal all of creation and bring forth the new creation. And I like to talk about this is more like a treasure hunt. So we're treasure hunting for beauty, goodness, and truth that's already in the world, and that that distinct prevenient grace idea that the Holy Spirit goes before us and is working in people's lives and in communities. And I feel like that puts us in a place of being right sized, or humility, where like we're acknowledging we're not coming with the solutions. We're not coming with all the stuff that the community needs to get fixed. We're coming in a space of vulnerability, and we're trying to find what the Holy Spirit's doing before us in communities. So I love how you've been able to bring that forth in your work. And tell us about like listening church and some of your work in that area, and what are some of your key findings that as you've been doing this research and becoming a listening church?
Yeah. So it kind of flows out of what we were just talking about. So in my first attempt at listening to the community, it was a needs assessment. It was, all right, what are the needs in this community? what are the holes in the kind of social agencies that aren't meeting those needs? Okay, that's what the church should be doing. And that was my first stab at listening to the community. And it didn't end particularly well. I realized that I didn't fix any of those needs that I had identified. Like I made a difference in some lives with some people, um, but yeah, so that was that first attempt at doing a listening process. And then when I started King Street Church, it looked really different. Instead of looking for needs that needed to be met, it was more asking folks like, hey, what's your spiritual life like? What would you look for in a spiritual community? What's your experience been with the church? What would you ever be a part of a church? If so, what would it look like? Like it was very different questions. And for me, I came to this realization that like the questions that we ask of our community will impact the answers that we hear. And the answers that we hear are what's going to impact the ministry that we do. And so if our first attempt, if our initial listening is always a needs assessment, we're just always going to find needs. There will always be needs to find in our community. And sometimes that's the right thing for the church to do. But I think the church is also called to be a spiritual home for people. Like the church is also called to be a place of belonging, a place of welcome and hospitality. And so like our listening needs to be more holistic. So that was one thing I found. Another thing I found when I started working at Carmen's office is we are like addicted to demographic studies. And like we love them and they're great. Like you should not try to listen to your community without a demographic study. But if that, it's not a substitute for talking to your neighbors. It's not a substitute for like having your feet hit the ground in your neighborhood. So that was another thing. And then another thing I found was that like there wasn't a spiritual element to much of the community assessment I witnessed. So even like in the community development areas of ministry, often there wasn't a focus on that spiritual, those spiritual questions, those questions about people's deep spiritual longings. And it was more around the longings around justice, around kind of political equality, those kinds of things, and those are important. But again, I was looking for something that could be holistic. And so out of that, when I signed up, when Michael Beck finally convinced me to get a doctorate of ministry at United with him, thank you, Michael. I was like, well, this might be a good time to work on that. So I've been, started something called the Listening Church, and it's still in flux a little bit. I've released a kind of beta version of a spiritual listening plan. So it's a series of activities that, a church can go through, can form a listening team to listen to God, to listen to the congregation, and then to listen to their neighbors. And there's activities in each of those categories. A church can do, just a couple from each category, or they can do the whole thing. And then out of that, the idea is that you have this really helpful information that can help you discern ministry innovation, that can help you discern next steps, that can help you discern where your church should focus. So I've been working on that for the last few months and gotten a lot of really positive feedback on it. It's still being tweaked and adapted. Really, I'm listening to people as they try it out. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's been really fun.
So what do you say? I get this a lot. A lot of our congregations are in rural contexts. I've served rural contexts my whole ministry up until I'm currently now in a somewhat of a city. But up until this point, I've been in rural churches. And I hear people say, well, how do I listen in my neighborhood? I don't have a neighborhood. How do you do this in a rural setting? We don't have third places. We don't have any of those things. I know that you're a person who's been committed to the rural church and its renewal. So how do you respond to that? How does Fresh Expressions work and emerge in rural settings?
I think the church has not done a great job of creating resources that resonate with rural communities. But for me, this deep listening, it's not dependent on it's almost universal in its necessity for a church. And so, it's on the one hand, it's a wider kind of lifestyle change to move from assuming we know everything to having a posture of attentiveness and of learning. And that transcends suburban, urban, rural. Yes, it looks different to listen in a rural setting, but being open to new information, being attentive to the conversations, having one-on-one interviews with your neighbors, these are things that happen across those different places. I did my ministry in Boone was probably a mix of suburban and rural. Is a college town in the Appalachian Mountains, but as soon as you left the city limits, it was rural Appalachia. And I would have incredible conversations on the front porch, sitting in a rocking chair with a older guy, and I would be listening. He'd be telling me about his life. He'd be telling me about his community. He'd be telling me about his neighbors and how they would come together. He'd be telling me about how things were changing, all these different things. This was spiritual listening that was happening on the front porch. And so I think, this is something that I think folks in rural settings will resonate with, and they'll have creative ways of doing it, just like urban and suburban folks will.
Cool. So I know that you're going to be one of the keynote speakers at a big event coming up here in the fall, Rural Rising. And I'm really, really excited to be able to learn from you. Piper, what else? Who else is going to be at that? Can we do a little plug here since Luke is
definitely. Yeah. So Rural Church Rising is a conference that from what I know, it seems like it's the first ever United Methodist, Wesleyan approach to doing rural church through Fresh Expressions conference. And so we're going to be meeting at Warren Willis, which is a summer camp in a rural area in Florida, in Central Florida. And some of our speakers include Luke Edwards and Michael Beck.
Yeah.
As well as the scholar Tex Sample, who is wonderful, and I'm really excited to hear from him. I've been reading his books for years. And we have Chris and JD Smith, who are coming from Western North Carolina.
Yeah.
Elaine Heath, who is also in North Carolina. We have a lot of North Carolina people. The Florida Bishop, Tom Berlin's going to be there. Stacy Spence Baldwin, who also just got her doctorate of ministries, and she focused in on rural church. And one of the ways that her passions, being a multiple point pastor in rural Florida, is through horses and therapeutic riding. And she has Fresh Expressions that emerge out of that. We also have Micah Blanks, who was a pastor in Appalachia for years and years, and award-winning pastor there, did a lot of really cool things. And I think that's all that we have so far. There's probably going to be some more. So we're really excited about it. And we got I feel like we have a dream team of speakers who are going to have some really awesome insight. It's going to be really, really fun, really exciting. And I will definitely put a link in our show notes so people can find it.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about you, Luke, is even though you are officially you've sold your soul to the company store and you work as you're up in the Death Star essentially of the empire, but you continue to be a practitioner at a local level. So you've started Who Lets the Dads Out, and you've continued to be in ministry as a practitioner and kind of bringing both those worlds together. So I love that you can speak about rural ministry, not as somebody who's removed from it currently in this moment in the 21st century, but as a real practitioner with a heart for it, who's also on the dance floor, figuring out and have a balcony view over an entire conference and really a denomination. So thank you for that. And give us a little snippet preview what you're thinking you're going to be sharing about.
Well, whatever y'all ask me to share about.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think listening might be a part of it. One thing I'm interested in right now is I live in Denver, North Carolina, which is one of the last holdouts of Charlotte suburbia. So it's Lincoln County, and they didn't want to become a suburb of Charlotte. So like all the suburbs grew around Lincoln County, with Charlotte kind of south of us. And eventually Lincoln County was like, okay, fine, we can't hold it back any longer, and started embracing it. A big highway got put in. And so now it's pretty young in comparison to the surrounding area of rural becoming suburban. And so it's like this kind of borderland phenomenon that I think a lot of rural folks might identify with, where there's still a lot of elements of rural culture, but the city is coming quick. And the non-rural people are coming quick. And so it's really interesting kind of place to live and to observe. But one thing that I'm paying attention to is the local dirt racetrack. So I don't know, that might be something that I incorporate into. I'm on the Facebook group, and it's been really interesting local culture. So that might be something I play around with.
Get yourself a car, start working on it.
I think my wife would kill me, but
yeah. You could just sponsor somebody else to do it and cheer for
there we go.
You're going to be the super fan. Get the t-shirt.
Yep.
That's awesome. My parents live in a kind of similar area in Texas, where it's like every time I come home, it's like there's more neighborhoods that are going out into what used to be ranches and things like that, And I always wonder, like, where are the people that grew up there? I wonder what they think about how there's like a suburban neighborhood in the middle of what used to be their house,
Right.
Yeah. That's something I hope we will talk about at the conferences, that kind of dealing with all of the changes and shifts, because I think our culture and our world is always changing, but in places like that, it feels like almost more potent, like you can see and feel that change, and a lot of people's lives are so intertwined, and so one person moves out and the whole community can kind of feel the waves of that. And so how do you do ministry in a space like that, and how do you in the face of a changing, shifting culture in a place that it seems like sometimes time slows down, in a lot of those small towns and rural communities.
Yep.
Yeah, we got a really good group of people. Are going to talk about it from a multicultural point of view, and from a like practical, and then some of the bigger, like overarching big ideas as well. So it's good. October 27th and 28th, I wanted to say that's when the dates are, but you can find it on our website and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, another one of the questions that we ask every time that we do this interview is this one. So, Luke, what does the future of the church look like to you, and what is your hope for it?
Oh man, that's a big question. And this is the kind of question that gets me excited. I think we can't even begin to picture the change that's coming for the church, particularly the mainline church. I think we're going to be smaller a lot smaller, but I think we're going to be more impactful. I think we'll figure out ways to function on less money, on less buildings, but that the folks that come will be committed, will be deeply longing for an encounter with God and for the kingdom to come. I think the heyday of the main line, where it might have been bigger, it was also a social gathering, as opposed to a gathering of people who wanted to be deeply transformed. So I think on one hand, it's scary to think about becoming smaller, but on the other hand, it's exciting to think about what it could look like to be a committed kind of remnant and a people who deeply long for the kingdom to come. So I think that will be a big part of it. I think, the role of clergy will be very different. I think there'll be a lot fewer of us. There'll be more of a supervisor, where the laity will be really the ones driving ministry. And the clergy will be folks that are helping make it all come together. I think I wonder if it'll look more like group spiritual direction than it looks like a Sunday morning corporate worship where the worship comes from the stage. And then I think there'll be a passion for community impact as well, for racial justice, for ecological justice, for economic justice, and that when the church is really committed to the gospel, then we'll begin to kind of live into that. I've just been reading about early Quakers, and they this book said that they were a thorn in the side of the English government. I think we'll become thorny again.
Luke, since you kind of thought about this deeply and really put a lot of prayer and time into it, and I love everything about your answer, but the part about group spiritual direction and communities looking like that, what would you tell people? What are some of the most important skills, things that we should do now to kind of prepare ourselves for that reality?
Yeah, so my wife helped me figure this one out at King Street Church. I was like, all right, so what does proclamation look like in this little group of young people that are passionate about spiritual connection, and spiritual community? And so I was like, all right, I'll just shorten my sermon. And so I would do little 5-minute sermons. And then right afterwards, people would start commenting about it. And my wife, after one of them, was like, hey, Luke, I don't think they want to hear you talk. I think they want to talk. And so from then on at King Street Church, I would prepare the proclamation time almost like I would a sermon, like I would do the same exegetical work and the research around it, but then I would create open-ended questions around the scripture. So we'd read scripture together, and then I'd ask 3 to 5 open-ended questions that were well thought out, and then I would lead a conversation around the table, whether it's at the pub, at the metal table in the B pod of the county jail, or the chairs pulled around in the computer lab of the homeless shelter. We would sit around in a circle and it was like the jazz band leader, the guy nodding, "Hey, what do you think over there?" Or all right, your turn to solo for a little bit. It was an art of group conversation and of digging deeper, of discovering what everyone had to offer. And what was cool about it is the conversations were so much better than what any of my sermon would have been on that topic,
Mm-hmm.
and what it was, whether they were Christian or not Christian. Like some of our agnostics are folks that were not anywhere close to being committed Christians. Like they contributed some of the greatest things to the conversation and like helped me be a better follower of Jesus. So like it might be a scary thought, but man, it's exciting and it's rewarding, and it's like you'll grow. So I think preaching's going to go through some changes, but don't tell all the people that preaching.
All the preaching professors and things.
Yeah.
Yep.
The Board of Ordained Ministry that has a whole section on preaching.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't think about how much those sermonic conversations, as Michael calls them, probably keep people humble, It's like you think you're going to have all the cool insights and like, okay, and then if there's a lull, I'll bring up this really cool insight, and then you don't even need to because somebody came up with something even cooler than you could think of,
Yep.
More insightful.
That's I remember we talked about communion one week, and I was like, all right, these are 5 points about communion I want to make sure that come up. And 4 of them got addressed by other people. I didn't even lead anybody into them. They just came up, It's like, okay, now I'll add the 5th one.
I love that. Cool. So last quick thing to kind of close this out. Where can people find you online so they can follow along with what you're up to and what's happening in Western North Carolina?
Yeah, so the listeningchurch.com, just make sure you put the at the beginning. So thelisteningchurch.com. It has my Substack on there and some links and stuff. That's probably the easiest. And then on social media, I'm Luke S. Edwards.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for joining us. This was a great conversation.
Oh, yeah. It's great to be with y'all.
Yeah. You settled the rain down, too. It got quieter over here.
I think people will like the thunder. It's like God was with us in our conversation.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. Add to the ambiance. And to those listening, thanks for joining in on this episode of New People, New Ways. If you enjoyed our conversation with Luke, please share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe and to rate and review and all that good stuff. If you'd like to hear more about Fresh Expressions and the Rural Church Conference and all the stuff that we're up to, you can go to freshexpressionsfl.org and find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. See you next time on New People, New Ways.